Hey everybody, my name's Andy and I am the Village Idiot and welcome to the Doncaster Round-Up video. I've decided to record this one in a little bit of a different way to normal. I've decided to go for the voiceover method instead of having the camera pointed at me, but it's still the same format. We'll go through all 43 parishes of the district and we'll see what information you guys have sent me regarding each and every one. Enjoy! Starting with Adwick-upon-Dearne, I didn't receive any information for this, so let's move on to Armthorpe. So as regards Armthorpe, I have a little bit of information for this one. The entrance to Armthorpe Welfare Football Club is at the side of the Morrisons on the main road. If you remember, I asked about that in the main video. According to one local, Hatfield Lane was the best roller skating playground in the 1950s and it didn't have any traffic back then. Let's move on to Asken. So Asken had a BMX track, but the new Children's Play Centre and the doctor's surgery was built in its place. The building I asked about in the video was the former Methodist church and it's been converted into a residential property. Let's move on to Auckland. Just the one bit of information for Auckland, the field next to the park, which I used as my TV I Asked the Local segment in that video, is unofficially referred to as Riverside Park. Moving on to Austerfield, I missed Button Meadow, a street named after the only person to die on the Mayflower, William Button. One resident has a tiled mural on the side of their garage of the Mayflower ship that children from the local school came to draw. The NHS hedge was sculpted by a local farmer. Sheffield City Airport fully closed in 2008. Doncaster Sheffield Airport was originally known as DIA, Doncaster International Airport, and it opened in 2005. Plans to open a commercial airport in Doncaster started as far back as 1994 or 1995 when the base closed and was kept maintained by the council. This picture here is a photo of Pilgrim Woman by Rachel Carter, which you can find in the New Daneham complex. It commemorates the women who founded America. Many travelled with the men, often with babies and young children, some even pregnant and working harder on the voyage than the men. Someone had to cook and clean and tend to the sick and the injured. The Mayflower pub had a chef called Tom years ago. According to one resident, the food was excellent and it hasn't been the same since he left. Let's move on to Barnborough. As regards Barnborough, I have no information for this one, so let's move on to Barnby Done with Kirk Sandal. So for Barnby Done and Kirk Sandal, the village of Kirk Sandal was developed by the Pilkingtons in the 1920s as a model village for their employees. The houses shown in the video are not actually council properties, but there are some council houses which begin on Graham Road. On Station Road is the site of an old malting building that burned down, which now has some modern housing built onto it. The park referred to between Kirk Sandal and Edenthorpe is known locally as Tesco Field, since Edenthorpe Tesco is on the other side of that open space. St Oswald's Church, 11th and 12th century, is near the canal and it was the centre of the original hamlet of Sandal Parva. Let's move on to Bawtry. In Bawtry, there are long ago filled in smuggler tunnels between Wharf Street and the workhouse featured in the video. Somewhere in the area is also the long lost battlefield where Anglo-Saxon king Ethelfrith was defeated by Redwald, king of East Anglia, in AD 616. Nobody knows exactly where this took place and the site has long since been searched for but never found. Moving on to Blackstone, I have no information for this, so let's move on to Braithwell. In the original Braithwell video, the junction shown at 3 minutes and 40 is where Jeremy Clarkson overturned a Reliant Robin on Top Gear and he was put back on his wheels by Look North presenter Harry Gratian. The big house behind the wall I alluded to was Braithwell Manor. The naming of things in the village Ruddle comes from the history of mining ruddle, or sometimes raddle, in Micklebring. It's a red coloured substance used for a few different things, but one of them was for cleaning optical lenses. Raddle is still used now as a paint on rams to see what ewes have been served at tupping time. The dentist is actually a doctor's surgery. Okay, Broadsworth. Broadsworth has a site dedicated to radioactive X-ray waste from Doncaster Royal Infirmary. However, the site is yet to be recorded on any public maps. The original site of Broadsworth Hall, complete with Roman mosaics, lies a short distance away in Handpole Wood. Drummond Avenue is named after Robert Drummond in Scoresby. It's off Emily Drive and leads to Rosedale Primary School. So by far the parish I got the most information about was Bergwallace, so here we go. Bergwallace is pronounced with the G sound. According to the Domesday Book, the village was originally called Berg and belonged to Richard Wallace, giving us the modern day name Bergwallace. Over the wall in the cemetery is the space reserved for Catholic burials, split into 3 parts. One for the Catholics, one for nuns, and one for members of the Anne family. Jeremy Clarkson's ex-family home is in the middle of the old village in another farm called Home Farm, and not the one that was featured in the video. Home Farm was also where Paddington Bear toys were first made. Called Gabrielle Designs, it was a cottage industry working out of the outbuildings at the front of the courtyard. Regarding the Abbey's Walk, the Abbey is buried next to his nurse in the graveyard of St Helens. The Abbey's Walk was originally called Common Lane. Some called it Mile Lane. The crest on the village sign is that of the Anne family, whom the hall belonged to. Bergwallace Parish Council sought permission from the last surviving and somewhat distant Anne relative, Mrs Ellison Anne, to use the crest. St Helens is supposedly named after Constantine's mother, who came to York for his coronation as Roman Emperor. There is a Roman fort site at the top of Scorcher Hills Lane, and Bergwallace is the site of a historic battle where Athelstane defeated the Danes. St Anne's nursing home was previously the convent. When the hall was populated by nuns, a vision of the Virgin Mary was seen in the grounds, floating about a foot above the ground. A small stone circle marked the spot for several years, and there were religious celebrations. The church put the hall up for sale for £650,000 in March 2021. St Helens had some interesting past vicars, one of them being Reverend White, supposedly the grandfather of the actor Wilfred Hyde White. The church dates from Saxon and Viking times, and a stone sarcophagus was discovered in one corner of the church. This apparently contained the remains of a Viking child. Moving on to Cavebeat, this already has a part 2 from when I used to do part 2 videos, so let's move on to Catley. With regards to Catley, there was a school on the corner of the roundabout, which is now a very large bungalow. It used to have 20-litre bottles of milk daily during the 1960s. The unparished area on the opposite side of the Yorkshire Wildlife Park was known as Catley Acres, as it was literally acres of land and fields that were built on in the late 1970s. On the bend in the village and to the right used to be a huge conker tree that regularly used to be climbed illegally. Catley Hall has got amazing gardens and a full working kitchen garden. Clayton with Frickley. Lord Ward Aldham owns Frickley Estate and Hall and Hooten Pagnell Hall Estate. The benches in Clayton were made by a man called Philip Gregg. Just the one piece of information for Conisbrough Parks, and that's to do with the viaduct. At the start of the viaduct there's a disused railway tunnel. If you wear suitable footwear and use a bright torch, you can walk through it. Similarly with Denby, Denby civil parish only covers Old Denby. Denby, or Denby Main as it's referred to, is an unparished area sitting between Old Denby and Conisbrough. Moving on to Edenthorpe. Sainsbury's in Edenthorpe is built on former farmland, and Doncaster does in fact have another one which I forgot about at the time, which is located in Thorn. There is a fifth pub in the village too, that's a Toby Carvery opposite Sainsbury's, and down the bridleway towards Tesco is a house called Tristrop. The manor house is the building at 1313 in the video, and the War Memorial only has names for World War II and the Falklands War. In World War I, Edenthorpe was a blessed village, which meant it suffered no losses. Moving on to Edlington, there are some concrete pillars that mark the pit shaft on the estate behind the Welly. It's Stumphenge, not Stonehenge, situated on top of the spoil tip, and in Edlington Pit Wood there's a cairn marking the pit top. I have no information for Fenwick, so let's move on to Finningly. Okay, with regards Finningly, the abandoned house belonged to an elderly gentleman, Mr. Raymond Wilkinson, who died a few years ago. It's since been bought by a local family, but they have yet to make any amendments to it. Wilkinson's parents had the farm before him. During the swine fever epidemic, they were forced to kill all of their pigs. Mrs. Wilkinson was known for sharing apples from their trees. Finningly Cemetery has the grave of an unknown airman. Now, were the peacocks hiding? Finningly is known for being a haven for peacocks who wander around the village almost at will, but we didn't see any in the video. The council compulsory purchased farmland to build the runway for RAF Finningly, which almost broke the farmer. He was to move to Top Street in Bawtry. The last known flying Vulcan was kept at RAF Finningly and was flown most days around dinner time. Moving on to Fishlake, one resident of Fishlake told me that the people of Fishlake and the other locales that get flooded just have to get on with it. They have no choice, and these days mostly no insurance and no government help in what really matters, and that's dredging the River Don. Dredging is considered non-PC as it may harm wildlife, which has angered Fishlake's community, as it would seem human life apparently doesn't matter in comparison. The EU banned most inland river dredging, only allowing it for rivers like the Danube or the Rhine and the Rhone to keep them navigable. For that reason, the Ouse and the Humber are still dredged, but the Don, because it's non-navigable, is not. Moving on to handpole, I've got quite a lot of information for this one. Robin Hood's well was moved to its current position not far from the original site to allow for the A1 to be widened. Richard Rolfe, a recluse healer, is buried in front of the old schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was built with stone from Handpole Priory. The village used to be much larger and housed mainly quarry workers. There is a memorial stone in Adwickler Street Cemetery called the Devil's Eye, which is dedicated to the 5 victims of cholera from Handpole. Less than half a mile up the road from the doctor's house on the junction with Hazel Lane is Little John's Well, sadly now well overgrown and vandalised. The stone quarry behind the well has been excavated over the years, with the natural spring that fed it also drying up. In Skelbrook, the churchyard has a medieval tomb of a knight, the tomb of Arthur Discargill, whose proven relative was Arthur Scargill, the NUM president. Discargill was the baron of the area, according to history. A few snippets of information for Hatfield next. As early as 1927, Dunsville is noted, and in the early 1900s, Park Lane House was renamed Winthorpe Hall. Opposite Old Thorn Road, there's a junction for an old quarry. It leads to Hatfield Woodhouse through a tunnel. There's also Bulcroft Woods near to the water park. With regards to Hickleton, the only piece of information I received for this was to do with the church gateway, where there are apparently some skulls. High Melton is next. So for High Melton, Box Tree House, built in 1740, is the oldest house in the village. At the start of the village, at the crossroads, you can see the original tree-lined road, known as the Ride. Tyson Fury and his wife Paris were married in High Melton Church. Alright, next is quite a lot of information and a nice little story with regards to Hooten Pagnell. Some of the buildings in Hooten Pagnell have their windows bricked up. That's because there used to be a window tax, which is where the saying daylight robbery comes from. There's a little graveyard opposite the cricket pitch down a small track, and I got this lovely little anecdote from one man from South Elmsall who used to sell the Sunday newspapers in Hooten Pagnell. He used to put all the papers out on the seats in the shelter and stand outside Hooten Pagnell Hall. They'd come, get the papers and give the exact money, and would never ever leave a tip. He never watched or took note of who took what, because he didn't have to. They all knew what they wanted and how much it was to the halfpenny. Towards Hickleton and past the cricket field on the right is a small wood. That's Fish Pond Plantation. The lake in there was the fish supply for Broadsworth Hall, and there was a large summer house in there too, as well as a herb garden. On the far side there's a keyhole-shaped maiden's pool that was fed by a spring, and stone channel acted as an overflow into the main lake, so it never dried out even in the hottest of summers. There used to be a railway station at Moorhouse, and there used to be a house at the road junction, which was the station master's house. The Ward Norbury family owned Hooten Pagnell Hall and have done for over 300 years. They have around 2,000 acres of farmland and a game shoot. Alright, next is Kirk Bramwith. The only thing I really missed in Kirk Bramwith was an aqueduct. I'll find a picture of that, I'll put it into the video at this point right now. Next is Loversall. I don't have any information for this, so let's move on to Mar. With regards to Mar, the Harrisons were quite an important family in Mar. They owned a farm which is now a new housing estate. Let's move on to Moss. I don't have any information for Moss, so Norton is next. So Norton was quite famous for its strawberry fields locally back in the 1980s, and that's the only piece of information I have for the entire parish, one of Doncaster's biggest. Next is Oaston. With regards to Oaston, a man named Walter Greenway came from Oaston. That wasn't his real name because he was a spy. Walter Greenway's Spy and Hero was a book by Robert Holmes. The story told within is true and it dates from around 1917. Not all of Oaston is the area around the church. In fact, there's more if you go across the A19 and down Rockley Lane. That's Oaston too, and it tends to be known as Little Oaston to avoid confusion. Little Oaston also includes a B&B, Hanley Farm and Meadow Cemetery, which are all at the southern side of the golf course on Oaston Lane. Next is Rossington. Now, as one of Doncaster's biggest, you can expect, of course, I got a lot for Rossington. Here goes. West End Lane is now 1.7 miles long now after the extension was built to the iPort. The water tower was indeed demolished, and shown is a picture of it being torn down. The Christ the King Church is in fact a Roman Catholic church and not a Baptist church, as was stated in the video. Rossington used to be classed as a town, having its own manorial court. The pump fountain has been moved several times. Its original position was close to the Kissing Gate on Littleworth Lane. When the town hall in Doncaster Marketplace was demolished, remains were found of Mary Magdalene Church, and despite several attempts made to stop them, the corporation decided not to restore the church and demolish it to make way for the new corn market. Remains and important artefacts recovered were said to have been put into storage, but then they disappeared. Amazon is only one of several companies operating out of the iPort, which is owned by Veriden. The iPort Academy is funded by Veriden and was established to support the employers at the iPort to meet their recruitment and training needs and promote all the available opportunities to local residents. Next is Sprotborough and Cusworth. Regarding the toll house, this was for a bridge. Several bridges came and went, and it was not a good place for a ferry over the river, being located at the bottom of a gorge with a commercial mill. There are some gargoyles, a grand stone balcony overlooking the river, an old turning circle and some stone stables, sadly the only things remaining of the beautiful Sprotborough Hall. The boundary of Sprotborough has caused many a debate. Some say Sprotborough runs from the village all the way down to KFC at the roundabout. On maps it shows Newton, but historically Sprotborough parish was farm and estate lands owned by the Copley family. Newton comes from the Newton farm in that area, which was also owned by the Copley family. Charles Watson Copley was the third Baronet of Fulmer, who inherited the Sprotborough estate, and his title was hereditary. Let's move on to Stainforth. Moving on to Stainforth, everyone was so happy to see how Stainforth and South Bramwith were so litter free. A big thank you must go to the voluntary litter pickers, serve volunteers and residents who tidy up outside their gardens. The Stainforth and Kidby Canal does not start until a further mile east from the bridge. The waterway shown is still the River Dun navigation though. The church at Stainforth is possibly the fourth church, the other two being located on Barnby Dun Road. Bramwith Hall is a listed building built in the 1700s, and Stainforth is also where the only Doncaster-born Nobel Prize winner, George Porter, is from. He was born at Ash House on Silver Street, and his early education was in Stainforth too. The War Memorial in Stainforth Cemetery was built in 1919 and was the first public war memorial built in the Doncaster area that took the form of a piece of statuary rather than an obelisk or a cross. The new Kings Park housing estate replaced the old pit houses which were Kingsway, Duke Street, Lord Street and Queen's Crescent. Stainforth is also the birthplace of the new initial mental health response unit by Unlock Your You. Both headgears at the colliery have a heritage protection on them. The Hatfield Main Heritage Trust are trying to avoid possible future usage as simply just a heritage centre. They've put forward possible future uses including a wide range of projects, from starter units for studio space through to virtual reality underground experiences. A miners' memorial garden is being developed where the Strike Memorial is. The wide footpaths are called backs or backings. The Central Club closed on the 31st of January 2020 and has been closed ever since. It's been the life and soul of the community for so many years, according to the last former landlord. One piece of information for Stainton, and that's the memorial on Limekiln Lane. Its official name is the Maltby Miners' Memorial. Moving on to Syke House. Wesleyan House, seen in the video, was built some 30 years ago and was indeed a Wesleyan chapel. There are two hamlets not featured in the video. These are Escombe and Topham. In Topham you'll find an old windmill and also an old railway station. There's a children's play area behind the village hall along with the cricket club's pitch. The how long is Syke House debate was quite amazing. Most people said it's 7 miles long, starting from Small Hedges Lane and finishing at the River Went. One of the local historians claims that when they measured the village, there are at least 2 pubs and they had to visit each twice, and they accidentally ran the tape measure around the bar 4,000 times. Pinchin Green appears to be an anomaly on Google Maps. Residents have told me it's Pinchin Green Lane, Syke House, as opposed to a hamlet in its own right. Next is Thorn. The building next to the church was the old vicarage, which was also used as a care home at one time. It's had various people buy and sell again due to it being a listed building. The building across from the church graveyard was a school. That was Thorn Grammar School, which was replaced by Trinity Academy. The Pentecostal Church is another building that was previously a school, and that closed around 2000-2001. Next is Thorpe in Bolne. I have no information on this, so it's on to Tickhill. A little bit of information about Tickhill. There's a rather large park off Sunderland Street, which is where Tickhill's large events are held, such as the Tickhill Gala. Tickhill Church Tower was used for marking and mapping the underground workings at Harworth Colliery. I have no information for Wadworth, so let's move on to Warmsworth, which is the last one. And the only bit of information I got for Warmsworth was that it has a Quaker meeting house on Quaker Lane. It was one of the last places the Pilgrim Fathers met at before their journey to the Americas. That's just about it. Thank you for all your information on all 43 parishes of the Metropolitan Borough of Doncaster. Thank you very much, guys. I've been the Village Idiot, and I'm out.